My brother sat me at a distant table at his engagement party because I was the awkward loner. But when he found out how much I earn, he showed up at my door, demanding I pay for his extravagant wedding. So I reminded him exactly why that wasn't happening. I've always known I was different from my brother, Daniel. While he was the center of attention at every social gathering, I preferred the quiet comfort of my laptop. My name is Emily, and I've never quite fit into my family's idea of what a normal daughter should be. Growing up, Daniel made sure I never forgot how weird I was. "Emily, you're such a recluse," he'd say, laughing with his friends. "All you do is sit in your room and code. How do you even function in the real world?" I'd just shrug and keep typing. The rhythmic clicking of my keyboard was more comforting than any small talk with his shallow, judgmental friends. While Daniel was busy planning his next night out, I was learning Python, Java, and C++. My parents never really understood my passion for technology, but they couldn't argue with my grades. "Emily, sweetheart," my mom would say with concern. "Wouldn't you rather go out with some friends instead of staring at that screen all day?" But I had my own ambitions, and they didn't involve following Daniel's path of constant socializing and reckless spending. When I got accepted to college with a full scholarship in software engineering, even Daniel couldn't insult me for it. Well, he still tried. "At least you won't have to worry about boys distracting you there," he smirked. After graduating, I landed a position at a top mobile development company. The salary was incredible, far more than I let on to my family. I knew exactly what would happen if they found out. Daniel would be at my door, expecting handouts, and my parents would guilt-trip me into helping. So I kept quiet. I rented a modest apartment, lived well below my means, and saved every penny. My dream was simple: a house in the countryside, where I could work remotely in peace, away from the noise of the city and the judgmental eyes of my family. But life, as always, had other plans. The curveball came in the form of a phone call from Daniel. "Emily," he said, his voice artificially cheerful. "I'm getting engaged. And yes, before you ask, you're invited too." I knew his fiancée, Claire. She was nice enough, certainly kinder than Daniel, but I still found myself wondering what she saw in him. "The engagement party is at La Belle next month," Daniel continued, his tone shifting to his usual condescending drawl. "And for the love of God, try to look presentable. No hoodies, no sneakers, and maybe try some makeup for once." I rolled my eyes, grateful he couldn't see me through the phone. "Yes, Daniel, I know what makeup is. I'll dress appropriately." The weekend after his call, I made the mistake of visiting my parents' house. The moment I walked in, I was met with an explosion of wedding planning. Mom was surrounded by bridal magazines, and Dad was drowning in catering brochures. "Oh, Emily." Mom barely looked up from her checklist. "Did Daniel tell you the good news?" "Yeah, he did." I sat at the kitchen table, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "So, how much is all this going to cost?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we're thinking about taking out a loan." I nearly choked on my apple. "A loan? For a wedding? Why not use that money for something practical, like a down payment on their first home?" Mom looked at me as if I'd just suggested they host the wedding in a gas station parking lot. "Emily, sweetheart, you just don't understand these things. You spend all your time with computers, you don't even have a boyfriend. Every person dreams of their perfect wedding day. Every person except me, apparently," I muttered. "That's exactly what I mean." Mom threw her hands in the air. "You don't understand relationships at all. When was the last time you even went on a date?" I held back a sharp response. There was no point in telling them about the guys I had dated, ones who either resented my career success or assumed I'd drop everything to support their ambitions. Instead, I simply said, "I just think going into debt for one day is excessive." "Well, nobody asked for your opinion." Daniel's voice came from behind me. I hadn't even noticed him come in. "Some of us actually care about making memories and enjoying life." I turned to face him. "And some of us care about financial stability." "Oh my God, you're so dull," Daniel rolled his eyes. "This is why you're still single. Everything has to be logical with you. Where's the excitement? The spontaneity? Probably in the same place as your budgeting skills," I muttered. Mom shot me a warning glare. "Emily, if you're just going to be negative, maybe you should go home." I stood, suddenly exhausted. Maybe I should. Good luck with the loan applications. As I walked to my car, I heard them return to their enthusiastic wedding planning. I wondered if they'd even notice if I didn't show up to the engagement party. But I knew I had to go, if only to prove that I could be normal when I wanted to be. The month flew by faster than I expected. On the day of Daniel's engagement party, I actually made an effort. I bought an elegant dark green dress, more expensive than I'd normally spend on clothes for an entire season. I even went to a salon and let them work their magic on my usually messy hair. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The taxi dropped me off at La Belle, one of the most expensive venues in town. Daniel had rented out the entire space for his engagement party, something that made my practical mind cringe at the unnecessary expense. The place was dripping with extravagant decor, fresh flowers everywhere, candlelit tables, and an open bar where champagne flowed freely. As I walked in, I noticed how the guests were already divided into their little cliques. Daniel's college friends were huddled near the bar, laughing and taking selfies. Claire's family occupied several tables near the front, all looking suitably impressed with the lavish display. My parents were making their rounds, my mother basking in the attention as she introduced guests to each other. I started searching for my seat, assuming I'd be at the family table near Daniel. After all, I was his only sibling. I checked the tables near the front. Then the middle section. Nothing. Finally, I approached my parents. "Mom, where am I sitting?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Mom glanced at me, her expression a mix of hesitation and something else. Disappointment, maybe? Even after all my efforts to look presentable, it still wasn't enough for her. "Oh," she said, looking around nervously. "Your table is over there." She pointed to the furthest corner of the room, partially hidden in the shadows, away from the expensive lighting. I walked over, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Sure enough, there was a single place card with my name on it. One chair. One place setting. At a table meant for 6. I stood there, staring at it, feeling a familiar sting of rejection. What the hell, Daniel? I turned on my heel and found him surrounded by his groomsmen, all of them laughing at some joke I wasn't invited to be part of. "Daniel, can we talk? Privately?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He rolled his eyes but followed me to a quieter area. "What is it? And don't make a scene." "A scene?" I scoffed. "You stuck me at a table by myself, in the corner like I don't belong here. And I'm the one making a scene?" "Oh, please," Daniel huffed. "Don't be dramatic. You know how you are, Emily. You don't fit in with my friends, and Claire's family doesn't need to be subjected to your vibe." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "My vibe?" I repeated. "Yeah. You're weird, okay? You sit at a computer all day, you barely socialize, and you always have some logical argument for everything. It's exhausting." Before I could respond, Mom suddenly appeared at Daniel's side. "What's going on here?" "Mom, Daniel just called me weird and said I don't belong with the other guests." Mom's face hardened. "Emily, please. Stop making this about you. This is Daniel's big night. Just go sit at your table and try not to draw attention to yourself." I looked between the two of them, my brother and mother, the people who were supposed to be my family. I felt something inside me snap. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my table in the shadows. I sat there for exactly 30 minutes. I watched Daniel and Claire make their big announcement. I watched my parents beam with pride. I watched the guests drink, laugh, and celebrate, while I sat alone in the corner like I was an afterthought. Finally, I'd had enough. I grabbed my purse, stood up, and walked out. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to stop me. The taxi ride home was a blur. The moment I stepped inside my apartment, I kicked off my expensive heels and changed into my usual outfit, jeans and an oversized hoodie, the same look Daniel constantly mocked. Then, I did what I always did when I needed to process emotions. I started coding. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and earning substantial bonuses. My bank account grew while my contact with my family dwindled to nothing. No calls. No texts. No visits. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. And honestly, it was a relief. That's when I decided to stop waiting and start living. I had more than enough saved for a down payment on a house, and my salary could easily cover a mortgage. So I contacted a realtor named Olivia and told her exactly what I wanted. Single-family home, preferably somewhat secluded. High-speed internet is a must. And absolutely no nosy neighbors. Olivia chuckled. I think I have just the place. She was right. The house was perfect. A modern country home with a wraparound porch, set on enough land to ensure my privacy. The previous owners had already installed a fiber optic internet connection, and the home office had massive windows overlooking a quiet lake. I'll take it, I said without hesitation. The mortgage process was smooth, and within weeks, I was a homeowner. I told exactly 2 people about my purchase, my best friend from college and my team lead at work. My family didn't need to know. They'd lost that privilege the night they made it clear I wasn't worth a seat at their table. I moved in gradually, setting up my home office first, then furnishing the rest of the house room by room. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. No drama. No judgment. Just me, my house, and the freedom to exist without constantly being reminded that I was different. But peace, as I was quickly learning, was a luxury my family wouldn't let me enjoy for long. 2 weeks after I'd settled in, my phone lit up with my mother's number. "Emily, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. "Come to the house tomorrow afternoon. Daniel will be there too." I should have known something was wrong from her tone. I should have asked why they suddenly wanted to see me after weeks of silence. But I didn't. Instead, I agreed, walking straight into the ambush they had planned. I pulled into my parents' driveway, immediately spotting Daniel's flashy red sports car parked out front. The same car my parents had gifted him when he graduated from college. I parked my hybrid behind it, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew something was wrong. My parents and Daniel sat in the living room like a panel of judges, their faces serious. Daniel, of course, had his usual smug expression, like he was already savoring whatever power play he had set in motion. "Sit down, Emily," Dad said, motioning to a chair facing them. I sat, my brain already running through possible scenarios. "Okay," I said, folding my arms. "What's this about?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Why don't you tell us about your new house, Miss Successful Programmer?" My stomach dropped. How did they? Then it clicked. "Olivia," I said flatly. "Your friend Olivia is my realtor." Daniel smirked. Bingo. Imagine our shock when she casually mentioned how she helped my sister buy a beautiful country house, he continued, his tone dripping with fake amusement. My sister, who always acted like she had no extra money. My sister, who let her family struggle while she lived in some cheap apartment, pretending to scrape by. Mom jumped in before I could respond. "We know everything, Emily. We know how much you make. We know about your bonuses. You've been lying to us all this time." "Lying?" I scoffed, standing up. "I haven't lied about anything. I just chose not to share my financial details with you. There's a big difference." "Same thing," Daniel snapped. "You hid your success. You let Mom and Dad stress about wedding costs while you sat on a fortune." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When exactly should I have shared this information?" I asked. "At my corner table at your engagement party? You were embarrassed of me when you thought I was a broke loser, and now you're mad because I'm actually successful?" Dad raised his hand to silence me. "Emily, the point is," he said, trying to sound reasonable, "you've never shown any interest in helping your family. We're taking out loans for your brother's wedding while you're buying houses." "Interest in helping?" I repeated, stunned. "When have any of you shown interest in me? You've never visited my apartment. You've never asked about my work, except to mock it as staring at a computer all day. The only time you care about me is when you need something." They all started talking at once. We could have used help with Daniel's college tuition. I needed a new car last year. The wedding venue deposit alone is crushing us. I held up a hand, stopping them. I'm done justifying my success. I'm done feeling guilty for being financially responsible. I'm leaving. Wait. Daniel's voice cut through the tension. I turned back, dreading what was coming next. We didn't actually call you here to fight about your secret wealth, he said, his voice disturbingly calm. I crossed my arms. Then why am I here? Daniel leaned back, smirking. Since you can afford to buy houses, he said sweetly, you can pay for my wedding. I blinked. Then, I laughed. Not a light-hearted laugh, but the kind of laugh that bubbles up when something is so absurd that you either have to laugh or lose your mind. Don't you dare laugh at us. Daniel's face turned red. You owe us. I stared at him, my amusement fading into something sharper. I don't owe you anything, I said coolly. Especially not after how you've treated me. How we've treated you. Daniel spat. You're the one who's been lying. You're the one who abandoned your family. I met his glare with an icy stare of my own. You're right, Daniel. I am successful. I'm the weird loser who can afford to buy her own house. I took a step toward the door. And you know what? Losers don't pay for weddings for their successful brothers. The shock on his face was almost worth all the drama. Almost. Emily. Mom gasped. How dare you throw his words back at him? Why shouldn't I? I said. He meant them. He meant them when he stuck me in the corner at his engagement party. He meant them every time he called me a freak. So why shouldn't I mean them now? I turned and walked out, ignoring their protests. Just before I stepped outside, I glanced back one last time. You know what's funny? I said. If any of you had ever treated me like family instead of an embarrassment, I might have actually wanted to help. But you made your choices. And I've made mine. I walked out, got into my car, and drove home. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The very next day, while I was setting up my home office, I heard aggressive knocking at my front door. I checked the security camera. Daniel. He was standing there, gripping a thick stack of papers, his jaw clenched. I opened the door but didn't move aside. What do you want? He shoved the papers at me. This is the list of wedding expenses. The venue deposit is due next week. I glanced at the numbers without taking the papers from him. The total was astronomical, enough to put a down payment on another house. And you're showing me this because? Because you're paying for it, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. All of it. It's what Mom and Dad expect, and it's what I deserve. I let out a sharp laugh. What you deserve? I repeated. Daniel, you don't deserve a damn thing from me. Not after the way you've treated me our entire lives. His face turned red. So that's it? You're just gonna be selfish? Yep. He let out an outraged scoff. Fine. Then you're not invited to my wedding. I smirked. Don't worry, I wouldn't come anyway. I already know which table you'd stick me at. I shut the door in his face. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next few days brought a flood of calls and messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, Mom had gone on a full-blown PR campaign, telling everyone about my selfishness and hidden wealth. Suddenly, people who had never cared about my existence were deeply concerned about family unity and sibling duty. Aunt Linda called me heartless. Cousin Mark, who hadn't spoken to me in 5 years, suddenly had very strong opinions on my financial obligations. Even Mom's bridge club friends were messaging me on Facebook. I sat in my home office, staring at my monitors, watching the notifications pile up. The programmer in me knew that every problem had a solution. You just had to find the right algorithm. In this case, the solution was simple. Debug the family narrative. I opened my social media accounts and started typing. Since there seems to be a lot of confusion about recent family events, let me clear things up. At my brother's engagement party, I was seated alone at a table in the darkest corner of the venue, away from all other guests. When I asked why, my brother called me weird and said he didn't want his friends or future in-laws to be subjected to my vibe. My own mother told me to sit there quietly and not make a scene. Now, weeks later, they've discovered I'm successful in my career. Suddenly, the brother who was ashamed to seat me with his guests is demanding that I pay for his entire wedding. The parents who never once visited my apartment now feel entitled to my finances. To all the relatives messaging me about family duty, where was this concern for family unity when I was being hidden at family events? Where were these messages of support when I was being mocked for focusing on my career? I bought my house with my hard-earned money. I'm not obligated to fund anyone else's life choices. End of story. I hit post and sat back. The fallout came faster than I expected. But not in the way I anticipated. The relatives who had been blowing up my phone. Silence. The guilt-tripping messages. Gone. Instead, I started getting private messages from cousins, some of whom I barely knew, sharing their stories about Daniel's behavior. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he'd treated like trash. My phone rang. Mom. Declined. It rang again. Daniel. Declined. Then Dad. Declined. They kept trying, switching between their phones, even calling from unknown numbers. I blocked them all. Then came the pounding on my door. I checked the security camera. Mom. Dad. Daniel. Daniel was screaming something about how I'd ruined his reputation. Mom was crying. Dad looked exhausted. I turned on the porch speaker, another tech upgrade I'd installed. Go home. I have nothing to say to any of you. Emily, please, Mom's voice crackled through the speaker. We just want to talk. Now you want to talk? I said, my voice flat. After years of dismissing me? After trying to shame me into paying for Daniel's wedding? No thanks. You're tearing this family apart. Daniel shouted at my security camera. I actually laughed. No, Daniel, I said, shaking my head. You, Mom, and Dad did that years ago. I'm just finally standing up for myself. They stayed on my porch for another hour, alternating between demands and pleas. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and kept working. Finally, they left. But not before Daniel screamed that I was definitely not invited to his wedding. Like that was supposed to be a punishment. The aftermath. Life moved on. I heard through my aunt that my parents ended up taking out a massive loan for Daniel's wedding. Mom had to give up her weekly spa treatments. Dad had to push back his retirement. But they still tell anyone who will listen about their ungrateful daughter who refused to help. Daniel got his dream wedding. Or at least, the version of it that my parents' loan could afford. I saw the photos on social media. It looked exactly like every other wedding Daniel's friends had, expensive, over the top, and completely devoid of personality. I also noticed something interesting. That lonely table in the shadows? They'd seated another cousin there. Apparently, she was the new family embarrassment, for the crime of getting divorced. My aunt still keeps me updated on family news, though I never ask for it. She told me my parents had to downsize their lifestyle significantly to afford the loan payments. Daniel, of course, complains constantly about how his small wedding was my fault. Conveniently, he leaves out the part where he tried to publicly humiliate me. As for me, I'm thriving. My house is my sanctuary. I've set up my dream home office, filled with the best tech. I've even started mentoring young programmers, especially girls who, like me, prefer computers to conformity. Last week, I got another wedding invitation. This time, it was from a young woman I mentor. She's marrying her girlfriend, and her conservative family refused to attend. Will you sit at the family table? She asked me. You're more family to me than they've ever been. I accepted, of course. Sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family you end up with. Sometimes, the black sheep of the family isn't the problem. And sometimes, sitting alone at a table in the corner is the first step toward finding your own place in the world. As for my parents and Daniel, they can keep telling their version of events. But I've learned something important. Their opinion of me doesn't define me. I am Emily. The programmer who bought her own house, built her own life, and finally stopped apologizing for not fitting into someone else's mold. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.